Hi, everybody. Welcome to your asynchronous lecture for this week. We're going to talk about eliciting initial student ideas in your lesson. So when we think about our general learning experience that we're trying to put together, we start with this idea of backwards planning. We talked about this in our last lecture. And this begins with truly understanding the standards, what students should know and be able to do by the end of your lesson, right? And so I asked you for this week to pick your standard that you're going to be modeling your learning experience after, and your anchoring phenomenon or problem that will go with that standard. In fact, I think I asked you to think of two phenomena that you could use just in case one doesn't work out. So I will look at your Google form responses for that. These are due this Friday. I'll look at your unpacking of the standard. I'll look at your possible phenomenon, and I will communicate with you via email my thinkings around your standard and the phenomenon that you chose. But that backwards planning has been done this week. Our goal now is to move on a little bit. Oh, excuse me. Let me go back and to look at what we're going to do in our lesson to elicit initial student thinking. And we have four ways that we typically do that in a lesson, right? We can ask students to develop a model. We could offer a focused free write explanation. We could do a prediction, or we could do what's called a QFT, or a question formulation technique. What I'd like to do is sort of pretend we're going to do four eliciting ideas. So I'll use the same phenomenon, and I will work you through four different ways to elicit student thinking in each way. I'm not saying that these are all perfect. I don't think this phenomenon lends itself particularly well to a few of them. I'll explain why as we go along. But I wanted to just stick with the one idea and show you these four different ways of eliciting student thinking, so that you can begin to think about which one works best for the phenomenon that you chose and where you want students to go in the end. So let's begin with our phenomenon. You might have seen this all over the internet, but I'll play it anyway. All right, so that's the dancing stick figure phenomenon. So let's do a QFT, or question formulation technique. So I'd like you right now to list 5 questions you have about this phenomenon. I'm going to imagine that you've done that. You can pause the video here if you actually want to work your thinking through this, or you can just continue on. At this point, if we were together in class, I would group you into 3 to 4 student groups. Now, as a group, I'd like you to come up with 20 questions you have about this phenomenon. You've already sort of pre-thought about 5 individually, so I'm putting you together now. I'd like you to come up with 20 questions you have about this phenomenon. I do not want you to stop to think about the questions or critique the questions or to rank them in any way, comment on them in any way. I don't want you to edit them as you write them down. Your goal is to really brainstorm a list of 20 different questions as a group. Okay. Obviously, you would provide students time to do that. In class, I like doing this on a whiteboard, giving them the opportunity to work through their questions later on and make it easy to change and adjust questions as needed. So we'll start there, 20 different questions. Once students are done, or you've set your timer and you've pushed everybody to those 20 questions, the next prompt would be, for each question your team has, I'd like you to identify the cross-cutting concept associated with your question. Now, you might have to direct students' attention to perhaps posters you have where cross-cutting concepts are. If you have small cards that the students keep at their desks, one student could pull out their cross-cutting concept cards. It's really not expected that students would have these memorized, right? This is new for a lot of students. You're first working with them. So make sure that you provide them the tools that they need to look at the cross-cutting concept and go back and forth with their question. So you'd have them identify the cross-cutting concept associated with each question. If they cannot come up with a cross-cutting concept, that's fine. Just cross out that question. They don't have to make a new one to keep their full list of 20, right? If they can't find one, they're going to cross out that question. The reason that we're doing this prompt is because for us to have good scientific questions, we'd really like them to be related to a cross-cutting concept. You as a teacher might have a cross-cutting concept in mind that you're trying to target. And so you're going to force them in that direction eventually. So it's a good idea for kids to get used to thinking in terms of cross-cutting concept. Very young students and middle school students will ask things about, oh, will this work with a purple colored marker? Can I get which is an okay thing. We could test that is sort of related to a kind of a structure and function. But maybe they'd also ask things like, can I get the stick figure to spin the other way? That might not really be related to what you want to do. Maybe they're going to say, could I draw, instead of a stick figure, could I draw a giraffe? Would this work with a giraffe? And in your head, right, what's kind of causing this phenomenon. And they could have some extraneous questions that are not related at all to the science of what's going on. And so by asking them to have these cross-cutting concepts, you're really kind of targeting them to the science of this. Once they've organized by cross-cutting concept, your next prompt is all the questions you have left. Ignore the ones you've crossed out. Decide if you could test these questions in your classroom. Is it something that's easily testable? Allow students time to have that conversation. And if it is, you can have them circle their testable questions, cross out their ones that are not testable. That's perfectly fine, however you choose to have them do that. Consider using a graphic organizer for this. I find that they're very helpful for students to organize their thoughts along the way. I haven't found a really good way to do this on the whiteboard with some sort of graphic organizer. I have them just make 3 columns that are here. So they're questions, cross-cutting concept column, and a check mark for a testable column, right? Or you could just have them do it on a piece of paper. It doesn't really matter. Now, you can also take this in a couple more directions. You could continue the QFT by insisting to have questions around a certain cross-cutting concept, like cause and effect. All right, so I could say, if your group does not have any cause and effect questions, at this point, I'd like you to create 2 additional questions that are related to cause and effect. Give students time to do that. Another way you could continue on with this is ask students as a class to organize the questions into categories. So as students give their testable question, you could write it down on a Post-it. You could put it in a category on a driving question board. And then you sort of have this driving board that's going to run where students' minds are going throughout this lesson. If you're really asking for things that are testable and you organize them into categories, you could then kind of have groups. Okay, I've got group A, you're working on testing these ideas in this category that are dealing with the marker. Group B, you've got all these ideas that we're testing that have to do with temperature. So you're going to test these temperature ideas. And you can sort of group it then, and that way you've got groups really focused on their investigations instead of going all over the place, kind of a shotgun approach. You're having groups kind of key in on what you want them to test. All right, so that's basically QFT in a nutshell. This graphic organizer is a clickable link, so you could grab this if you wanted to as something you could use in your lesson plan. And I provided some more resources for you down here. One is that leads you right to the group that came up with question formulation techniques, so you can read a little bit more about how to do that. They do work a lot with changing questions from open to closed. I don't find that as useful for our young scientists. The more useful is trying to tie it to a cross-cutting concept. That really hones them in on questions related to science. because I found that just the open and closed, you have groups that'll have 20 beautiful questions and not one of them's related to science. And you just spent 20 minutes switching from closed questions to open questions or open to closed. And there's really nothing there that you're going to be able to test in the science classroom, right? So I think having them tie it to cross-cutting concepts just makes more sense, and it really focuses them on the science. Second thing we could use is a focused free write. All right, so we're still dealing with that stick figure phenomenon. A focused free write is very easy on your end to set up. You're not really running anything. Your students are writing. What you gain in time with planning and doing in the classroom, you lose because you now have to read all of their free writes. All right. You could have them share their focused free write, but it's not the same as you reading them. And most kids tune out as they're reading focused free writes. So I find it's much easier to read them and then sort of group students based on their focused free write from there. So here's the prompt. If I was running a focused free write with this particular phenomenon, you have 5 minutes. I'd like you to write your initial explanation for what you think is causing the stick figure to lift off of the surface and move around the table. Note, the prompt has to include the cross-cutting concept that you are trying to target. It can't be this random, really open, focused free write, right? So what do you think about this phenomenon? You're going to get garbage. So what you need to do is you need to really focus them on, that's why it's called a focused free write, focus them on what you're looking for. And so this is a cause and effect that I'm trying to highlight. You could see I asked them for cause and effect in the QFT. I have what you think is causing the stick figure to move around. I actually have that word, right? So if you were focused on patterns or something else, you'd want to make sure that cross-cutting concept language is in your prompt. Third way you can elicit initial student thinking is a prediction. There's really 2 ways that you could do this prediction. One you've already seen when we did the chicken development activity, and that is you can provide 2 to 3 predictions. You as the teacher provide the predictions and then ask students to choose one of them along with a why. Okay. Now, the why could be written or it could be a model. Your choice. You could have just a written explanation of why, what they're thinking around that prediction, or you could have them develop a model that shows what they're thinking around that prediction. Right. The second thing you could do is just ask students to make their own prediction, write it down, and then you could share as a class. So it's really up to you how you choose to go that next step, right? Do I want to give them the predictions and then a why? Do I want them to come up with their own prediction and then a why? Your choice. Okay. I like giving them the predictions. I find that even up through like sophomore level, especially since this is so new to students, it really helps, again, focus them. My AP students, I would ask for their own prediction. By that point, they were, into science enough and had seen enough of the way I asked to do things that they were pretty good at coming up with their own predictions. But definitely middle school to low high school, it's not a bad idea, especially at the beginning of the year, if you're going to choose this method to elicit ideas, to give predictions and then let them choose. You definitely want to give a range of predictions. Think about all the possible things. Again, you're putting things that seem reasonable in there that students might even have as a misconception. For example, when we did the frozen water bottle, right? My middle school kids, I had a water bottle, I put it in the freezer, and then we were going to weigh the frozen water bottle. And I asked them to make a prediction or to think about what was going to happen to the weight of the bottle after we froze it. So I gave them the 3 possibilities, right? It's going to remain the same. The mass of the bottle was going to increase. The mass of the bottle was going to decrease when it was frozen. And so, it's not just about giving them super plausible things. They can be a little outrageous as well, too. And it's really helpful if you know some student misconceptions, because putting in the misconception prediction is always a lot of fun on the teacher end, because you can see how deep rooted the misconceptions are in your class. All right. I do want to make a note again, in this prediction, that when you prompt students, again, you want to have that cross-cutting concept kind of inherent in what you're doing. These aren't random predictions, I think the stick figure is going to, spin around. It's really, we're focusing on cause here. So here's my prompt. Students were curious about what was causing the marker to lift off of the surface. As a class, they had 3 different predictions. The type of marker used caused the stick figure to lift off the surface. So this is getting at the cause, right? It was the marker, the ink that I was using. Some of the students thought the type of liquid used was important to lifting the stick figure off the surface. Another group of students said, no, it's got to be the surface, that whatever they were drawing on was the reason the stick figure lifted up. I'd like you to choose one of the predictions you most agree with and provide an explanation of your thinking. So you can see that my prompt has the cross-cutting concept. I provided students with 3 predictions. I'm asking them to choose one and then write a written explanation. And that's basically how you'd run a prediction eliciting. Last, and probably the one that we really need to hone our skills in and hone our students' skills on, is modeling, developing a model. Ambitious Science Teacher, chapter 6 and 7, which you were asked to read, really gets to this point of modeling, and it's excellent. There are so many practical teacher moves and ways that you can help students along the way in those 2 chapters, and I highly encourage you to really delve into that. I'm just giving you the highlights in this lecture. So some best practices. Never ask students to model things. They should always model an event or a process. Making Jell-O cells is not modeling. Making a model of the solar system is not modeling. It is a thing. And we have to get away from these arts and crafts projects that are, a model of a thing. Scientific modeling, we want to represent an event or a process, something that is happening. Okay, it's okay. You might want to say, develop a model that explains why seasons happen opposite in the northern and southern hemisphere. Okay, that's an event. Model how develop a model to show how water moves into a cell. It's an event or a process, right? So please try to keep that in mind, that these kind of artsy, craftsy things of a thing, just really not modeling. Anything I can look up a picture in a textbook is really not something I want my kids to model. This is one of the hardest things to get teachers to really understand. You want your phenomenon to be context rich, not a very general idea. You want it to be an event that happens in a specific place, at a specific time, under very specific conditions. It really focuses students in on the modeling, and it actually helps them get into it and really try to understand what's happening in this very specific event. Models should always be pictorial, not just written. When you ask them to draw their model, you want to remind them that you want to see what is observable and unobservable as part of this process. All right, so there could be forces involved. There could be things that are very small, and we want you to show that in your model. Usually with an event or a process, there's something that occurred before, there's something during the process, and there's something after the process. You want to have ask students to model all 3 of those times, the before, the during, and the after. You want to make models in such a way that they're easily revised. Large poster paper that's cheap I like newsprint on a roll that you can just rip off and give them pages, and it's cheap. It's much cheaper than Post-it paper or something like that. Whiteboards are great. We use the large whiteboards a lot at Buff State, and those are great. They can change colors. They can revise. Post-it notes stick very easily. It's really just a nice way to do some group modeling. I like the idea of providing templates for things you don't want students to spend time on drawing. You will have some students that will just precipitate on how their bottle looks in the model. And you could care less what their bottle looks like because you want to know what's going on in the bottle, right? And so providing them the template for the bottle is very helpful because they're going to do the before, the during, and the after. And if they have to draw this bottle 3 times, you might be there for 3 days. So give them things that really are immaterial to the model, but are necessary. An outline of a human body, your beaker. I don't know if you're doing some sort of cell process, you might give them the boundary of the cell membrane, something like that they don't have to keep drawing again and again. As a class, you should decide on common conventions that the whole class will use. This is very helpful before you send kids off individually. You can talk about zoom in bubbles. Hey, what's causing this might be unobservable. So you might have to zoom in on where the stick figure meets the surface and show me what's going on. Or maybe you need to show me, you get down to the really small level and show me how the liquid is interacting with the marker on the stick figure. And you might want to use a zoom in bubble for that. Are there any forces? How are we going to represent forces here? Are there any molecules we might want to talk about? How can we all agree on how we're going to draw molecules? Can we just do squares and circles for right now? Or do we, is it important for you to actually see, hey, when we draw water, I want water to be drawn like a water molecule. Those are all things you need to think about ahead of time as a teacher and then work through the discussion as a class. As a teacher, you need to be explicit about the must-haves, items that have to be included in the model. Again, we're trying to focus students. We don't want an art project. We want their thinking. And by focusing them with really good prompts, you're going to get the thinking that you want. I've provided you some resources here. If you choose modeling as a way to go, Ambitious Science Teacher has a beautiful planning template for eliciting thinking through modeling. And that's the first one. And then the second one is just some more general information about modeling that goes even deeper than Ambitious Science Teacher does, for those of you that are very interested in that. So if I was using my stick figure phenomenon, here's what I might do for modeling in a classroom. Prompt: develop a model to explain why the stick figure created with marker remains intact and lifts off the surface when water is added. So you have to show me why this doesn't dissolve, why it stays intact, and why it actually lifts off the surface. Those are 2 ideas that I would like in your model. Your model must have all of the relevant parts of the system, including the surface, the marker, and the liquid. All of those must be used in your model. I'd like a before that explains why the marker sticks to the surface, a during that explains what's lifting the marker off, like why is that happening? And then I'd like an after that explains why the marker remains lifted and stays intact in that liquid bubble, right? You are going to have to give me some zoom in bubbles to show the unseen events or processes. There are things happening there that we can't see. And so I'd like you to use some zoom in bubbles for that. We're not together as a class, so we can't have a discussion about other conventions, but we would do that right after this. And then I would give students time, obviously, to do their modeling. Once individual students have their models, it's really important for students to share their ideas to the class. And Ambitious Science Teacher gives you some really nice ways to do that. I don't want to dig into it because that's part of your reading, but that would kind of be your next step with modeling. It is very public, and it should drive where the class goes next. So that's my brief introduction to those 4 ways of eliciting initial student thinking. So your upcoming assignments are to read chapters 8 and 9. This will focus us for our next lecture next week. Again, I hope you're finding it very useful. I consider it my teaching Bible. I refer to it on a daily basis. I have things tabbed all over the place with notes to myself throughout the book because it is just so rich in pedagogy. No formal assignment other than to read it. The next assignment I have is I'd like you to choose one of the phenomenon that you gave me in your Google form. Again, please wait till you get my comments via email about your phenomenon and your standards. And I'd like you to choose one of them, all right, based on my comments, because one I might throw out. So be very careful about what you choose. And I'd like you to write out your plan for introducing this phenomenon. How are you going to introduce it to kids? Are you going to just have them come in, sit down, watch a video without you saying anything? Is it something happening in front of the room that you're not even talking about? Or are you going to tell a little story before you introduce this video? Is it a demo that you're actually doing in front of the students and you have some talking points that you're going to use as you're doing this demo? I don't know. That's for you to decide. So I'd like you to write out that plan for me, just to introduce the phenomenon. I'd like you to include all relevant materials. What do you need to do this? Are there links to videos that you're going to use? What are the prompts? What are you saying to students as you do this? What is the safety concerns, if any, especially if you're doing a demo or if students are doing something at their desks as the phenomenon? Okay, please list all safety and any special classroom setup that you need. This is not a full-blown lesson plan. I'm only asking you to write out how you're introducing that phenomenon. And this will be due Wednesday. I gave you some more, I guess, explicit instructions on the blackboard. The next assignment is to decide which of these 4 techniques I just spoke about and that you have been reading about to elicit initial student thinking. Write out your plan for running the eliciting part. All right, same rules apply. What are the relevant materials? You know, if you're doing modeling, do they need whiteboards? Are they doing it on small white sheets of paper first? If you're doing, predictions, do you have a slide with your 3 predictions on it? Everything. I'd like you to tell me all of the things that you need. Have it prepared and ready to, do basically. Do you need links? What are the prompts? What are you saying to students to run this particular technique? This will be due Friday. So introduce your phenomena by Wednesday. Think about how you're going to do the initial thinking part, and that will be due Friday. Along with this Friday assignment, I'd also like you to give me an example of the thinking you might expect from students. Just one example is fine. So if you have a QFT, I'd like to see some questions you think students would come up with. If you're doing a prediction, I'd like to see, a student choice on the prediction and their why. If you're doing focus free write, what might a student write about your phenomenon? If you're doing modeling, what would a student model look like? I want you to think ahead, one example of what a student might do. And you can identify this as an average student or an above average student. You might even want to do what you think a below a student, a struggling student might give you. But an honest attempt by a student, not something that we're not going to play games here with. Oh, well, these are my students who just don't care. They just draw a circle on their model. That's not what I'm talking about. I really want you to dig into student thinking on this particular point. What do you anticipate students giving you? As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email and we can try to meet via Zoom or just resolve your issues over email. I hope all of you have an excellent Thanksgiving this week. Try to stay safe. And I will see you on lecture next week, Tuesday on Zoom.